There are moments in the wild that don't follow any rule written in any field manual. Moments where instinct overrides protocol, where a single decision made quietly, almost without thinking, ends up meaning everything. This is one of those moments. And it began not with drama, not with urgency, but with a sound, a small, disoriented rustling near the base of a Douglas fir, somewhere in the fog-heavy hills of Northern California, on a Tuesday morning that had started like every other. Ranger Dale Whitfield had been walking that stretch of trail for 11 years. He knew its rhythms the way a man knows his own kitchen in the dark, the soft give of the earth near the creek bed, the way the mist sat low in October, the calls that belonged and the silences that didn't. That morning it was a silence that stopped him, or rather something moving through it wrong, not the careful, deliberate movement of a predator, something uncertain, something lost. She was crouched near a cluster of rocks no bigger than a writing desk, half hidden by a curtain of low fern. A bobcat, young, maybe 14 months, old enough to have been on her own for a while, but barely. Her coat was damp, her ears turned toward every sound with an almost mechanical anxiety, rotating like small radars trying to make sense of a world that had stopped making sense to her. She moved forward 2 steps, bumped the rock face with the side of her head, and stopped. Then she tried again, same result. She sat down and made a sound, not a growl, not a cry exactly, something quieter than both. Something that, if you were the kind of person who listened closely to things, would stay with you for a long time. Dale didn't move for nearly 4 minutes. He stood at a respectful distance, watching, understanding slowly what he was seeing. Her eyes were open, but they were wrong. Clouded at the center, pale where they should have held depth and gold. She wasn't injured in the way a trap or a predator leaves a mark. This was something that had come from within, a condition, congenital or progressed, that had taken her sight quietly, the way fog takes a hillside. And she had been living with it long enough that her body had begun to compensate. The low crouch, the wide planted pause, the constant ear movement. She had been navigating entirely by sound and scent, and she was exhausted by it. He radioed in. He used careful, measured language because that was how Dale Whitfield talked about everything. Carefully, with no excess. He described what he was seeing. He asked for guidance, though he had already made a decision somewhere behind his eyes before the radio crackled back. The response was what protocol required. Document the sighting, observe from distance, do not intervene unless the animal poses a public safety risk or is in immediate visible distress. He wrote the response down in his field notebook. He looked up at the bobcat. She had tried to walk again and had turned herself nearly in a full circle without knowing it. He closed the notebook. What followed was not reckless. People who didn't know Dale sometimes assumed that acts of quiet compassion were the same thing as impulse, but they weren't. He was methodical about everything he did, including this. He spent the next 2 hours simply being present, letting her grow accustomed to his smell, his stillness, the specific weight of his breathing. He ate his lunch slowly, without sudden movement. He let her hear him open the thermos, pour the coffee, set it down on a rock. He spoke to her in a low, even voice, not baby talk, not commands, just words. Ordinary words about the morning, about the trail, about the way the light was starting to break through the canopy above them in long, pale columns. By early afternoon she had stopped startling at his voice. By late afternoon she had moved, voluntarily, without bumping anything, to within 6 feet of where he sat. He called his wife that evening from the truck. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, which was one of the things he had always loved most about her. When he finished, there was a brief pause. "So what are you going to do?" she asked. He looked out the windshield at the dark shape of the hills. "I don't know yet," he said. But they both knew that wasn't quite true. Her name came later, after the paperwork, after the calls to the wildlife rehabilitation coordinator, after the careful construction of a proper enclosure on the east side of his property where the tree cover was thickest and the foot traffic from the road was nothing. The name came the first morning he brought her food and she lifted her head and turned her clouded eyes toward the exact spot where he was standing before he had made a single sound, as if she already knew him, as if she had decided, in whatever way a wild thing decides anything, that this particular human was safe. He called her Luna, not because she hunted by moonlight. She never hunted at all, not really, not in the way her instincts had once intended. But because there was something in the way she moved through darkness, through a world she could not see, that reminded him of the moon navigating the sky, present, quiet, finding her way by forces invisible to everyone watching. Neither of them knew in those early weeks what they were building. It didn't look like much from the outside. Just a man, getting older, walking a fence line at dusk, and a blind bobcat, listening for his footsteps. But it was already something that would outlast them both. The first months were not easy. Nobody who understood wild animals expected them to be. Luna did not transform overnight into something calm and cooperative. She was a bobcat, wired by millions of years of instinct to trust nothing, to need nothing, to survive alone. The blindness had stripped away her independence but had not touched the wildness underneath. Some mornings Dale would arrive at the enclosure to find her pressed into the far corner, low and tense, every muscle coiled against a threat she could smell but not locate. Some mornings she would not eat. Some mornings she would pace the fence line for hours, her head swinging side to side, mapping and remapping a world that kept refusing to stay still. There were people who questioned the arrangement. A wildlife officer Dale had known for years stopped by in June, walked the perimeter of the enclosure with his hands in his pockets, and said what he felt needed saying, that a blind bobcat was a liability, that the kindest thing was often the hardest thing, that Dale had a good heart but good hearts didn't always make good decisions. Dale listened to the whole speech without interrupting. Then he thanked the man for coming and walked him back to his truck. He never mentioned the conversation to Margaret. She found out anyway, the way she always found out about things. She didn't push. She just started leaving his coffee on the porch rail on mornings she knew were harder than others. The real turning point came on a night in late July. Sudden, unplanned, the kind of moment that doesn't announce itself. A summer storm rolled in fast off the ridge, and Dale went out in the rain to check the enclosure. He found Luna in the center of it, completely still, rain flattening her coat, her face turned upward, not panicked, not pacing, just present in it, the way wild things sometimes accept what cannot be changed. He stood at the fence getting soaked, watching her. She turned her head toward him, precisely, without hesitation, and made that sound again, the quiet one, the one he had heard the first morning on the trail. He put his hand on the fence rail. She crossed the enclosure slowly and pressed the top of her head against his fingers through the wire. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then she turned and walked calmly to her shelter. Dale stood in the rain a moment longer. Then he went inside, dried off, and slept better than he had in months. Dale's health had been declining quietly, the way he had always done everything, without announcement, without drama, a diagnosis the previous winter, treatments that tired him more than the illness itself. He still walked the fence line every evening, slower now, one hand sometimes resting on the top rail, not for balance exactly, but for something harder to name. Continuity, maybe, proof that the ritual still held. Luna noticed before anyone said a word. Animals don't read charts or understand prognosis, but they read the body with a precision no instrument has ever matched. She began sitting closer during his evening visits, not pressed against the fence the way she sometimes had in her younger years, restless and curious, but settled, deeply, deliberately settled on the other side of it, facing him. Her clouded eyes turned toward his face, her breathing slow and matched to his. His daughter drove up from Sacramento in March. She stood at the kitchen window one evening and watched her father at the fence line, Luna 3 feet away on the other side, both of them utterly still in the last gray light of the afternoon. She didn't say anything when he came inside. She just put her hand briefly on his shoulder as he passed, and he nodded once, and that was the whole conversation. He passed on a Thursday morning in early April, quietly, at home, the way he had lived. They buried him on the property, as he had requested, near the eastern tree line, not far from the enclosure. A simple marker, a small gathering of people who had known him long enough to understand that he wouldn't have wanted anything elaborate. Luna was agitated for days afterward, pacing the length of the enclosure, her nose working constantly at the air, reading something in it that had shifted, something absent that had always been present. She stopped eating for 2 days. His wife Margaret sat near the enclosure each morning with her coffee and talked to her, the same way Dale had, ordinary words, steady voice, until gradually, slowly, Luna began to settle again. The first time it happened, Margaret thought it was coincidence. Luna had moved to the far corner of the enclosure, the corner that faced the tree line, faced the marker, and she sat there completely still, for nearly 40 minutes, head raised, ears forward, as if listening for a specific sound in a frequency no one else could hear. She came back to that corner the next day, and the day after. It became the thing she did now, in the long evenings, not pacing, not restless, just sitting with her face turned toward the place where he was. Seasons changed the way they always do in the hills, unhurried, indifferent to human grief, quietly faithful to their own rhythm. Spring followed the hard winter. The Douglas firs put out new growth. The creek running below the property swelled and then settled. Life continued in the way life insists on continuing, whether you are ready for it or not. Margaret kept the enclosure. She never seriously considered doing otherwise. Luna was older now, moving with the deliberate economy of an animal that had learned over many years exactly how much energy each thing required. Her muzzle had lightened, her movements were slower, more considered, but her senses remained extraordinary. She still turned her head toward sounds before they fully formed. She still knew Margaret's footsteps from 30 yards away, distinguishing them from every other sound the morning made, and she still went to the corner. Every evening, without exception, Luna would cross the enclosure and settle herself in the far corner facing the tree line, facing the marker beneath the old fir where Dale had been laid to rest. She would sit there in the long, fading light, ears forward, head raised, absolutely still, for sometimes 30 minutes, sometimes longer. Margaret had stopped trying to explain it to visitors. She had stopped needing to. The people who saw it understood it immediately, in the place beneath language where certain things are simply known. A wildlife biologist who visited in the second year offered the careful, measured language of science, scent memory, spatial association, habituated behavior, all of it accurate, none of it complete. Margaret listened politely and offered him coffee and did not argue with any of it, because she had watched it too many times now to need an explanation. What she saw was not complicated. An old blind bobcat, sitting quietly in the evening light, her face turned toward the place where the only human she had ever fully trusted had come to rest, returning not out of confusion, not out of instinct misfiring, but out of something that looked, from every angle, exactly like fidelity. Dale Whitfield had spent his career understanding wild things, documenting them, protecting them, giving them space to be exactly what they were without asking them to be anything else. In the end, the wild thing he had given the most space to had given something back, something no field manual had a category for. She came back because he had mattered. Some things don't require more explanation than that.